And there's certain anti-competitive market forces at play that keep it that high, where you have the networks, the credit card companies like Visa and MasterCard setting the prices that merchants, our members, NFIB members, have to pay to banks rather than the banks setting those prices. So every bank gets the same fee. It keeps fees artificially high, and it really has been a problem for our members.
The Small Business Rundown is the official podcast of the National Federation of Independent Business, the member-driven voice of small business. NFIB and our members advocate to keep America's small businesses strong and independent in Washington, D.C., all 50 states, and the nation's courts.
Welcome to the Small Business Rundown, a biweekly podcast with information on independent businesses' victories and challenges in Washington, D.C. and state capitals. I'm Adam Temple, NFIB's Senior Vice President for Advocacy. Inflation is the top problem for small business owners and has consistently ranked as one of their top 2 concerns for the past 30 months since November 2021. To help small businesses fight inflation, NFIB recently called on Congress and the White House to take action. To talk about that, today we're joined by NFIB's Research Center Executive Director, Holly Wade, and Vice President of Federal Government Relations, Jeff Brabant. Holly, Jeff, welcome back to the Small Business Rundown.
Thanks for having me here, Adam.
Great to be here.
Holly, can you start by providing a brief economic overview based on what you're seeing in the Research Center?
Yes, so every month NFIB surveys a random sample of our membership. And so every month we get a snapshot of what are the main issues or problems that are facing small business owners. And as you mentioned in the intro, for the last number of years, inflation has been one of the biggest challenges that they've been facing. In fact, in April, 22% of our members say that it is their single biggest challenge in operating their business. So it's a significant impact for small businesses. They haven't had to deal with this for decades. So it's a new problem that many small businesses are having to deal with and absorb those price increases of their supplies and inventories into their business and passing along those costs to their customers. And it's a difficult situation for small business owners in trying to navigate those price increases, how to absorb them, and stay competitive.
How do you respond to the argument that tax increases will actually combat inflation?
Well, we've had increases and decreases in taxes over the years, and they've been very independent of inflation, generally speaking. And inflation, and the onset of inflation and the sustaining inflation, it's a broader set of circumstances that cause it. So taxes, they're going to burden, if you increase taxes, they burden small business owners. We see that in our survey data. When we have tax increases, they respond that it negatively impacts their business. And, that doesn't mean that it's going to impact inflation. As I said, that's a broader set of circumstances that they're having to deal with in that regard.
Okay. Turning to the policy side, NFIB released a short list of ways Congress and the White House can help small businesses fight inflation. Jeff, can you break that down for us?
Sure, absolutely, Adam. The first thing we issued was to stop issuing costly regulations. The administration has issued a host of costly regulations over the last several years. The biggest offenders from the Department of Labor, where we have seen things like increase in the overtime exemption threshold, meaning more employees will be eligible for overtime. When we look at the fact that labor is one of the number one drivers of inflation right now, if you make labor more expensive, well, inflation's going to get worse. Businesses don't necessarily just have more money just because you have a mandate to spend more money on your labor force. That will then go into your prices of your goods or services. We're also looking at significant new regulations coming out of the EPA and the Department of Energy on both consumer products and things like cars. We have a recent EV mandate whereby within the next several years, you're going to have to move to EVs if you're a car manufacturer. And as we all know, there's nothing wrong with electric vehicles, but electric vehicles are very expensive. Car batteries are still extremely expensive. And if you phase in electric vehicles, they're going to be more expensive than traditional vehicles, and it'll make inflation even worse than it currently is. So the one biggest thing we can do is pull back that regulatory state just a little bit to help small business owners. Number 2 is make the small business deduction permanent and make sure small business owners don't see a tax increase at the end of 2025. Right now, over 30 million small businesses are scheduled to see a tax increase at the end of 2025. That's when the 20% small business deduction is scheduled to expire. That's when marginal rates are expected to increase. And that's going to be a significant issue. Just because taxes increase doesn't necessarily mean a small business owner can easily absorb them. They're more than likely going to have to pass on the fact that they have less money and increased costs of their products or services, which again will be an inflationary impact. Number 3 on our list was inject competition into the anti-competitive swipe fee marketplace. Now, if you're a merchant, if you're a restaurant or a retailer, and you accept credit cards, you're probably well aware that swipe fees are out of control right now. They could be as high as 3 to 4%. And there's certain anti-competitive market forces at play that keep it that high, where you have the networks, the credit card companies like Visa and MasterCard setting the prices that merchants, our members, NFIB members, have to pay to banks rather than the banks setting those prices. So every bank gets the same fee. It keeps fees artificially high, and it really has been a problem for our members. So there is legislation out there to help rein that in. It's called the Credit Card Competition Act, and NFIB supports it. Urges you to go to NFIB.com and let members of Congress know about that. The 4th thing, reduce the cost of energy. As this kind of goes along the lines of what we talked about in the first issue of the costly regulations, but anything Congress can do to reduce the cost of energy will help our members, especially if you're a small business who's in an energy-intensive field like manufacturing. The cost of energy is a huge input. I know every summer we see the cost of gasoline rise. That's just one input for small business owners. There's also the cost to heat the business, the cost to manufacture your product or service. So anything that they can do to reduce the cost, whether it's through permitting reform, whether it's through accessing more energy, or whether it's through less burdensome regulations in the energy sector, that will help reduce the cost of energy for our members. And then, of course, number 5, curb healthcare cost increases. Now, that's a lot easier said than done, but I think any American, any small business owner will tell you that healthcare costs are increasing at an unsustainable rate. And there are a number of things Congress can do to reduce those. In terms of the easier things, there are paperwork burdens that small business owners currently face that Congress can reduce or eliminate. That's a small thing to help it. And there are other things to help make the market more competitive, where if Congress can make a more competitive healthcare market, reduce some regulatory burdens on small business owners, hopefully that will bring down healthcare cost increases, which are an annual problem for small business owners.
So other than creating this list and subsequently relaying it to policymakers, how is NFIB planning to advocate on these issues?
We're already up advocating on Capitol Hill on these issues every day. And one of the questions we often get from members of Congress when we're advocating on Capitol Hill is, what can we do for your members and what is their number one issue? And our monthly surveys show the number one issue they're dealing with right now is inflation. So now when we go up to Congress, we have a whole menu of options to show to them, hey, this is exactly what you can do to reduce inflation for small business owners.
And what would the impact be if even 1 or 2 of these issues were addressed by the end of this year?
I think if we pull back the regulatory state a little, and if we extended the small business deduction and make sure that small business owners don't have to worry about a tax increase in just a year and a half, I think it could be very helpful. Now, is it a silver bullet? Probably not. But, there's very few silver bullets in life. So we're just trying to help small businesses the best we can.
And for those small business owners out there listening, what can they do to bring one or all of these issues to the attention of their lawmakers?
Tell your story. Go to NFIB.com. We have an action alerts section. Fill out the action alerts. Make sure your members of Congress know your story. I can go up there on Capitol Hill every day and lobby, but it's much more effective when they hear a small business owner from their state or district telling their personal story.
Thanks, Jeff. Before we go, is there anything either of you'd like to add?
One thing I'd like to add is just that we certainly understand the unique position small business owners face when dealing with inflation pressures and having to pass those costs on to their customers. Small business owners are wearing many hats in operating their business, and having to reprice their products and services takes a lot of time and effort, and they're the ones having to do all this themselves. And so the pressure that they feel and the stress of inflation, generally speaking, is particularly challenging for small business owners.
Thank you, Holly, and thank you, too, Jeff, for providing insight into the economy and how Washington can help ease inflation and cost pressures. This episode's show notes will include links to take action on these issues with more information on each. Our next episode premieres on June 27th, and we'll hear about NFIB's latest advocacy event, our DC Fly-In, and from those small business owners who attended. If there's a question you'd like us to answer on the next episode, go ahead and send us an email at podcast@nfib.org. And now I want to thank you, the listeners, for joining us on today's Small Business Rundown. We'll be back every 2 weeks bringing you news and analysis from Washington, D.C. and state capitals so that you, whether you're a small business owner or a supporter of one, can continue to blaze a trail.
The Small Business Rundown is brought to you by NFIB, the voice of small business. You can find us at nfib.com and on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.